You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Nondisabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a club, organization, whatever, for disabled students, staff, and their allies to discuss and educate each other about disability-related topics, advocate on behalf of disabled students and the community, and to hang out together and just be a community.
So we want to be more recognizable to Sac State. So please join the conversation by following and messaging us on Instagram at Dana at Sac State. It's DANA at Sac State. Welcome to the third episode of Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Nondisabled Alliance. My name is Brian Tao, and I'm one of the officers of Dana and the host of this podcast. Our topic today is going to be about our experiences with Services to Students with Disabilities, or SSWD. Last week, we had our first meeting where we did an unofficial guide to SSWD with the director of it, Dr. Vance. You can watch the recording on our YouTube channel to hear more about it. We didn't have time to talk about our personal experience, so this episode is going to be for that. To get a more in-depth background and knowledge about SSWD, you can check out the recording as well. As always, this is going to be a very free-form format, so expect a conversation with many tangents. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as always, I'm here with the president and founder of Dana, William and Rhian.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, and to kind of get us started, like for those who were not in the club meeting or didn't check out the recording yet, can you, Rhian, explain the process of SSWD and what exactly is it?
Yeah. So SSWD is a department of Sac State that provides students with academic and on-campus housing accommodations. In order to get these official and enforceable accommodations, you need to get registered with them first. To do this, first go to SSWD's online portal, the link to which is found on their webpage, and then you need to fill out an application form for their services. When you do this, you need to provide medical documentation of your disabilities that need accommodating. Once you submit it, you then schedule an intake appointment through the same online portal. At least a week after your application has been submitted, I'm assuming that this gives the people working there a chance to look at your case and make sure everything's legit and in order. But whatever the reason, they need a week. So at this point, if you haven't provided medical documentation with the application, someone will reach out to you from SSWD requesting that information before you meet. And then once the day comes and you have your appointment, you'll meet with your new access coordinator. Previously known as counselors, these individuals are the designated people you go to whenever you need help with renewing, changing, or enforcing your accommodations. They will ask you questions about your needs and what accommodations would fit your disability. For example, if I explain that because my muscles are weak and I have trouble keeping up with notes, they would offer a few suggestions. I could have a volunteer note taker, be permitted to use tablets or computers in class, or sign a form permitting me to use audio recording. The options we go with depends on which would allow me the greatest independence with enough support without going overboard with that support. So in my case, I'm permitted to use technology in class to type my notes and to audio record as well, because my muscles get very tired very quickly, but I don't necessarily need a note taker to take my notes for me. If your disability doesn't directly impact what the accommodation you want is related to, then you will not get that accommodation. For example, I am perfectly capable of making computations, mathematical computations myself. So I would not get a accommodation for usage of a calculator in a class that does not allow you to use calculators because I don't need it, right? I mean, I prefer it. I'd really like it. I'm not the greatest at math, but it's not related to my disability, so I wouldn't get that accommodation. So once you sort everything out with your access coordinator, your accommodations, what you're permitted to use, all that, you get a letter of accommodations. This is basically written proof of what accommodations you've been approved for and you have to renew it every semester if you want to be able to make sure that your professors are following it. You can easily send a digital copy of it to your professors at the start of every semester through SSWD's online portal. And there, your professors can easily see and keep track of all the accommodations they have to follow for their students. It used to be that we students would have to hand them a physical copy of it or email them a PDF, but this got complicated because the professor could easily lose the paper or the email they received could get buried.
We have all been there.
Yeah, and to kind of summarize, like if you need accommodations, you apply for it, and once you apply for it, you have to talk to like your access coordinator about what accommodations you need, and then you have accommodations. You have to send the letter of accommodation to your professor. That's a pretty easy process, right? Yeah.
For those on the audio, that was a thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay, so next, I kind of want to talk about our personal experience with SSW in general, and I probably can start first. So like for me, I don't really like need it like personally, but I have it just in case like I do need it in the future. I think that's important. And my kind of like disability is really strength related, so my muscles kind of get weaker over time, and I don't really know if I get weaker like in the next 5 years. I don't know what my strength level would be, but it's nice to have for the future. But like I haven't shown my letter of accommodation since my first semester, and I kind of consider it like my test run. Like for example, I had accommodations of 1.5 times the amount of like time to take for quizzes and exams, and like I don't really need it. Like most of the time I get done within the time. Like for example, there's a 5-minute quiz and you get like 7.5 minutes. 60-minute quiz, we get 90 minutes. And like for me, like I don't really need it at that time or like right now, because I always like finish within the time. But like everyone is like so different, so you may need more time because you need it, or I need it because yeah. Yeah, but like I think it'd be really nice to have more time though, but like it's not something I need. And like kind of going along with this, like to kind of get those more like amount of time, you can go to a testing room, and essentially you can take your exam in another testing room, so you can get like extra time with your stuff. But like for me, like I don't really like this per se, because like sometimes when professors just kind of talk to other students when they ask questions during the exam, you kind of want to hear it, right? Because it might help you with the exam. Or maybe the professor makes a mistake on the exam like the day of, like, oh, this question is wrong. I have no right answers, and you wouldn't really know that like before like the testing room. So like I like personally for me, like it doesn't really benefit me, so that's why I want to take it in the classroom. And another thing that I had accommodations for was a classroom assistant, to kind of get my stuff out. But like it's not really worth it because that's all I really need them like for, and it just wastes a lot of their time.
I haven't thought about like the complications that come with paper tests in so long. It's been literally years.
Yeah, it's been too long. Something else that I had was an ADA table, but it's like I don't really need it like on paper because all classrooms have ADA tables. It's not something I have to worry about. And that the last thing I had was recording lectures, but like that'd be nice to kind of go back to the lecture, but I wouldn't go back because I'm too lazy. Because it's like a whole hour of lecture, and I don't think I want to go back. It's gonna be way too much work. So like for me, like I don't really need it, but I have it in case I do need it in the future.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a reasonable accommodation like for me or if it would be, but like I would love to record audio because that is how I cram for tests. Just like play them all in a row.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that'd be nice, but like, yeah, your disability is more visual, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I can like briefly talk about my personal experience because it's not with SSWD per se.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a new optometrist as of today to get corrective lenses for my various ocular conditions, which amount to a disability in a way that becomes very stark when you're actually like in front of the like testing screen with the ginormous letters you can't see. Sometimes I forget how bad my eyes are until I go to the optometrist. But anyway, I got a new one recently who knows what nystagmus is, but that's a change about a year and change ago, I went to an optometrist over in a different part of Sacramento, who I had to explain the condition to, and I walked out of there with contact lenses, but like not ideal ones. And yeah, so by the upshot of that as well was that I was not able to, at least within a reasonable time, get that optometrist who didn't know what nystagmus was, just thought I needed corrective lenses, to sign on to the disability verification form, you could say, the medical form that they send you with from SSWD. This time it was on paper because this was a while ago. And what that meant is that I didn't sign on with SSWD and just proceeded as though I were like a non-disabled student. And so far that's been so good. I personally have my pride all wrapped up in accommodations as well, which is not like the right attitude to have, but it's always been mine. Because when you go through like elementary school in with the special ed classes, it can be psychologically tough. So I'd rather not have them if I don't need them, like really badly. So even to the extent I've genuinely needed them, I've sort of stayed quiet. But that's no comment on like SSWD as an institution, as a department within the university. Comments are to come, but this is just like the personal bit. So for me, it's just I'm not there. I didn't especially need to be, and the reason I'm not mainly is this that I couldn't get the documentation in order. And yeah, I'll comment on that later as well.
Yeah. I guess do you think that you'll be on it like this semester or next semester, or do you think you're not going to do it at all?
It seems unlikely.
Okay.
Most of my classes are at this point largely like lecture based, which is good for me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, probably not. And having a new optometrist means I'll have access to better vision, because I'm gonna get better lenses and like reading glasses on top of those lenses. So that'll wind up being significantly better in the run of a semester.
That's good. Rian, do you want to explain what your personal experience is at?
Yeah, I'm kind of like the opposite of you guys. I fully embrace my accommodations even when I don't necessarily need them, because I often do end up having off days where I do need them really badly, because for the most part I can manage on my own just fine, but it's really nice to have that backup just in case. So to go into more detail, I have overall had a pretty good experience with SSWD, and any of my bad experiences I've had were directly related to the inherent pitfalls of this sort of approach to accessibility, being that the burden to enact and enforce accommodations falls mainly on students. And I am really bad at remembering to get my letter updated and to my professors. And that's resulted in a lot of awkward situations, but it's not really anyone's fault that it's set up like that, and there's not really much we can do to fix it. It's just the byproduct of trying to tack on accessibility to an institution, Sac State, made for abled people. Anyway, I have a muscle disease too. It's spinal muscular atrophy, and it affects my energy levels and strength, as well as moderate. Well, it doesn't affect my hearing, but I also have moderate hearing loss. So some of my accommodations include permission to use technology in class for note-taking and in tests if there's an essay component, permission to audio record lectures, permission to drink water and eat during class, that's the energy level part, caption videos in advance, access to the ADA table, and to clarify, that's the big table that you see in classrooms that has the blue wheelchair sticker on it. And I implore you to stop putting your stuff on that table. It is not meant to be a storage spot for your bags. Take your stuff off the table. Thank you. PSA over. Other accommodations I have include access to
that's so
private
annoying, honestly.
testing rooms and time and a half on quizzes and tests. I digress. Being able to use my tablet in class is a huge relief because it's a lot easier for me to take notes on there. And I actually do listen back on the audio recordings if I feel there's something I missed or the explanation I wrote in my notes makes no sense. That happens a lot more frequently than I would like it to. I also really appreciate the private testing room because it allows me to keep my energy up with water and snacks without disturbing other students. And I can also take my time if I do need time and a half with the test without worrying about when the next class needs to use the classroom. There is that pitfall of not hearing what the professor says or sends out, but usually when that happens, if there's a mistake on the test, they correct it for me because they know I wasn't there, and we just kind of smooth it out and we're good. And I don't always need time and a half, like I said before, but it is still greatly appreciated oftentimes because I'm not always at my best physically when there is a test. And a math problem that takes one person a minute to write out will take me 2 or 3 minutes to write out. I'm still computing it just as fast, but my handwriting, well, I mean, I'm not good at math, so maybe I'm not computing it just as fast. But my point being that my handwriting isn't great and I get tired really quickly, so I need to take my time with it for both my health and for my professor's sake. I want them to be able to read what I'm writing. And this is also why I appreciate being able to type my essays. Writing things out by hand wipes me out very quickly, and as you can probably tell from this podcast, I am a rambler. So being able to write what I want to say without worrying about how much longer my hands can hold out is a huge relief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad that we have like 3 different perspectives. One that's like, yeah, I need it, and other one is like, yeah, and I need it. No, I don't need it, but I have it just in case. And one's like, I don't need it at all. That's really great.
Mine's more like I probably do need it. Like it would probably help a lot. But I don't have it for administrative reasons, which Rian outlined as well, and the personal reason that is childhood. But yeah, like can I speak to like tests and in particular, because my like personal experience with tests is always that I always feel like I have just enough time, if that, to like properly read and understand every question and answer it once. And to a degree, I wonder if that's been helpful. Like if I had time at the end of a test, if I had something like an accommodation like time and a half to use to go back over the answers, what would happen? Would I, have a better understanding of the question the second time around, or would I overthink it and like misremember and modify one of my memories and change my answer in accordance with what is wrong? Probably that second one. Like, and as like for essay questions, I have some of the same concerns as I think everyone else does. Where I think everybody worries about the dominant hand on an essay question, and I in particular worry a lot about penmanship as well because I never learned how to do it good, and that makes things a challenge. I've ended a couple quizzes like, oh crap, I didn't realize I had so little time, but genuinely, like, yeah, the reasonable accommodations were probably would have been helpful, but were just too burdensome to get. And that's kind of the theme when we're talking about SSWD, as Rian mentions. And we had a conversation with a journalism student from the Sacramento State Hornet. At the time of recording, it was yesterday evening. So effectively Friday. No, Thursday. Sorry. and we did a few tangents that we might feel are worthy of rehashing here as well. But one of them was that we can characterize, and this was Rion's characterization, SSWD as a band-aid on the wound that is a fundamentally ableist design for curricula and classrooms and everything. Whereas like that's not intentional on the part of the professors or the curriculum designers or the classrooms. And I think the professors design the curriculums anyway. But that's also something to be that is a theme throughout politics, where every individual is acting in good faith and they are acting within constraints and within a system and within an ideology that isn't necessarily accommodating to everybody. So one of the conceits is that like the buildings at Sacramento State, and Ron can go off on this one, but like I'll summarize it and say they're basically poorly designed for wheelchair users. And that's not true across the board, but it's true across enough of it. And the reason they get that way is because they just didn't consult people with disabilities to help design those spaces. That wasn't an intentional move on anyone's part. Neither was the restrictions on the amount of time that you get on tests, and neither is like the restrictions on like under what conditions you can audio record a lecture. These are all like good faith decisions by decent people, we're inclined to think, at least. But they did not take into account, and they really could not probably take into account what various people with various differently built bodies might have to say on the issue, because they just weren't consulted. They're not in those conversations. So yeah, that when we say that something like when I say, rather, and I don't represent everyone's opinion, but like when I say that SSWD is a symptom of the problem just as much as it is a helpful tool to have at the disposal of disabled students, I mean that to say that like it's a symptom of the problem that is basically our entire social order, being like neoliberal capitalism. So that's my bit. Like SSWD is can be characterized broadly as like good for what it is, but what it is fundamentally flawed. As was mentioned, like it's not impossible to introduce like universal design into classrooms. It's at least not in some aspects. Like you mentioned, there is a ADA table, as the term, in pretty much every classroom, right? So that's just something that's there. You don't have to go to a special administration for that. And in fact, it's because it's reserved for people with mobility impairments, it's typically not used for other stuff. Oh, I didn't realize it was an issue where people were like leaving their stuff there.
I can't tell you how many times I've walked into class and people have like left their water bottles and their bags on it. I'm like, can you move your stuff, please? Like trying to be as polite about it as possible, but like, I exist, right? We've met before. This isn't the first time I've showed up to class. Like this will happen in the middle of the semester and they'll leave their stuff there and I'm like, I need to use the table. Can you move your stuff? But yeah, sorry to interrupt, but to kind of summarize basically like the bandage analogy, it is helping the problem, but it's not necessarily fixing the problem, and it's a very, very clear indicator that there is a problem in the first place. So that's kind of what SSWD is. I mean, why do we need an entire department to, vet disabled students and give them certain accommodations and then enforce it? Why is it that we have to rely on an entirely separate group of people for our rights instead of working together as a whole community on campus to enforce the rights? Like, why is it just one little department instead of integrated into the whole thing, right? And I admit that's hard to do because, like, Sac State was built with abled people in mind and not with disabled people in mind. But, that's why it's indicative that there is a problem. And I don't know if it's necessarily one we can fix, but we can definitely make progress once we recognize that SSWD is just something to help us in the moment. It's not the solution.
Right. And that's like the political trap of it, where it's proposed as the solution when it's at the level of legislation. Like, oh, you introduce a department to make the school more accessible to people, and it doesn't amount to universal design. I mean, not even, maybe universal design is impossible, but like SSWD doesn't even really come close, because it places by necessity, by administrative necessity, such a disproportionate burden on the disabled students, that it can't really be said to be universal design. You're still encountering probably outside the margin of difficulty. So yeah, but like, if you're like the legislator, you can get a pretty easy win by introducing a new department into the CSU system, right? And not really have to think about it again, because you can now tout this accomplishment without really having solved the problem. You've put a band-aid on the wound.
Beautiful band-aid we've put on the issue.
But you're not wounded,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of want to talk about like different campuses, because like not every like college has a disability department, but like sometimes they have like a letter and it doesn't fall on like the disability department, the testing center. It falls on the professor. So if you say you have accommodations, the professor has to find a room for you to kind of fit that schedule and be there as well. And do you think that's a really bad idea, to make everything fall on the professor?
Well, not necessarily. I feel like it should be a shared responsibility. Enough so that no one person is fully at fault for their needs not getting met, right? And I will say is that it is legally required for schools to accommodate disabled students. That is a legal requirement. It's just that they might approach it different ways, and some schools, LICCD, do not want to fulfill those accommodations because they think it's too much work. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it should be a more shared responsibility, and it shouldn't all fall on to individual professors, but individual professors should be, conscious of their students' needs and try to proactively meet those needs, like within the curriculum design, right? Like, instead of assuming that all your students are going to be fully able-bodied, and making your course accordingly, maybe assume that you're going to have a variety of different needs within your classroom and your student population, and construct your assignments and class structure accordingly. That will go a long way in helping students access the course properly, like having alternative formats of like the same textbook available. Like you could have a link to the regular textbook, or maybe the textbook you link to has a website and you can increase the font size up and down at will, or you'll have different PDF versions of it that are adjusted based on different needs that might exist, for example. And then if there is additional help that the student needs, then the student can step in, or the services department can step in and say, okay, the student needs this, here's how we can help you meet their needs. Or the student says, hey, I need this is what I had in mind, or can we talk about this to figure out how to approach it? So I feel like it should be more of a teamwork thing that everyone's actively trying to stay conscious of and working at, but not so much that the burden of thinking about it all the time and making sure it's happening all falls on one person or another, right?
Yeah, and I guess the reason why I mentioned it is because I was reading Reddit. It was r/professors, and one of them were complaining about how much like disabled like students that they have, and they're just mostly complaining about it because they don't have like necessary help. There's no testing room, so they themselves, for like 6 people, have to find a room for them to kind of take it at a quiet place. And I think that falls too heavily on a professor, because professors are like busy in their own way, and there should be like different departments that kind of help with that.
Yeah, definitely. The school should take responsibility for, having the setup in place for professors to accommodate their students, right? The professor can't do much if they don't have the facilities to accommodate the student. Yeah.
And I'll bring in something as well. I had so many things to bring in, but I'll say, like, just for here, I guess the until I think of the other thing, my intuition runs exactly counter to I think Rian's here, and I think I'm wrong. But hear me out.
Okay.
If it all falls on one person's shoulders, that person basically has no way to pass the buck. There's no way to share, the blame for a thing. Therefore, the threat that you use, whatever it is, administrative, penalties or straight up financial penalties, or even like if you're a politician, the sort of political penalties. If that all falls on like one person, then that one person is going to be, really pressured to get the job done. Obviously, that's stupid because, if it all falls on the professor, let's say, as often it does, as we discussed, that turns out to be like not only does it not particularly work, but it places a huge undue burden on the professor, who, even if not a researcher, has a very difficult job. Like we don't, administrators as well. Like they're not, as I say, people tend to be acting in good faith, but they're acting within constraints, right? So, and some of those constraints are epistemic, but a lot of them are just material. Like if you don't have the room, you don't have the room, and if you need to find one, you might not even be like compensated for that time, etc., etc., etc. But that, so like the language that I typically understand policy in, where it's like threat and fear that gets anything done. And I think I'm correct to understand it that way, for the record, but that doesn't need to articulate itself as being one person, under the hammer of the law. It can manifest in different ways. And one idea about that is that if it should be a team effort, it should be a collaborative thing, because everybody has a different, perspective on a problem, and everybody has a different level of resources to devote to that problem, and everybody has a different, I said, understanding of it, but basically a team effort can work, but only if everybody is acting as part of that team. Nobody can pass the buck. And if everybody is under some kind of, has some kind of power and some kind of threat. And the way I'll put that is, like, obviously the professors have power, have a lot of discretion over how they teach classes, but they have to, the administrative conceit right now is that they have to do reasonable accommodations that are proven to be necessary under penalty of something administrative. Like usually, if you've tuned in at this point to the meeting for Thursday, that's going to be confusing throughout the whole semester. It's an alternating schedule. If you tuned into the meeting on Thursday, you probably heard Professor Vance talk about the various sort of things that have happened to professors who straight up refused to do reasonable accommodations under the right conditions. We don't want those penalties enacted, but they exist, basically, is the point. So the professor has power and threat. The student obviously has a threat being levied against the student, but it doesn't necessarily have any particular power. Like, what are you going to do? Take your business to another university? You can't get accepted. And the universities being a business in the first place is stupid, but I'll leave that for another time. The student basically has the threat, but not really the power. So how could we go about, like, establishing greater power for disabled students to be able to, not to wield that power as like enacting the threat, against other people, but like as being able to wield it, as being able to have that impact that doesn't rely on the beneficence of others so directly, I guess.
Yeah.
Ultimately, a threat does rely on beneficence, but that's like a moral philosophical thing.
Yeah, because I think most of the power students have right now is the power to go to their access coordinator and say, hey, this professor isn't following my accommodations. But like William said, the huge problem with that is that you have to rely on someone else to take care of the problem, and to get the professor to cooperate. And that leaves the door open for things not working out, because not every access coordinator will understand or be on your side, or not every professor will be like, oh, oops, my bad, let me fix that. And sometimes not even the school will be on your side. And there's so many variables you have to rely on. And while SSWD is overall a really good branch of Sac State, and the people there do generally care about the students, there's always going to be that one person who isn't helpful at all and actively undermines you. And you can find that person anywhere in the process of these checks and balances. And where William has pointed out that students only really have the incoming threat and they don't really have any inherent power as students, it's the opposite for the university itself. They only really have the power, and they don't really have any incoming threats, because any incoming threats would be legal, and legal shit costs so much money, money that a college student is not going to have.
Nope.
Just saying.
Yeah, I'm going to generalize that even more and say tort law is toothless for the average person. But yeah, like so one way to and I guess that's kind of the relationship we're aiming for with disability advocacy, with like cultivating a community around this. One of the objectives would probably be to eventually and to some extent be able to levy a passive threat against institutions that are, you know, supposed to be accessible, which is almost all institutions, by the way. I would maybe accept like the military or something like that, but in general, that would be good. And one of the ways to do that, I'll suggest, is to have this potential for collective action on the sidelines. Like even if you don't have a protest march going at every moment, and probably you wouldn't want to anyway, if you have that capacity, if you are proven to be able to get that kind of thing organized, get lots of people behind a certain cause, and so on and so forth. If you are able to mobilize a huge collection of people who themselves are like individually very incidental, very fungible, but like in droves, in numbers, are extremely threatening, you have that now passive power. You have that threat to levy against the institutions. So that's, I managed to get here. we got to the protest marches. Yeah,
every
like
time, William, every time.
If you've got pitchforks and torches waiting in the wings, then people are more likely to listen. And currently, disabled students do not have the pitchforks and torches.
We're trying. There is a national coalition between disabled students of colleges across the U.S. starting to form, and they're trying to call attention to the inaccessibility of their respective colleges and, you know, create change. But progress is slow going, and it does depend on how much attention they get. And, you know, these days, pitchforks and torches come in the form of online mobs, and
crash the website.
That isn't always easy to garner, especially if your issue isn't a quick, you know, attention-grabbing, enraging issue. Like, book gets canceled versus disabled student can't access their courses. Like, which one's going to get more attention? The book gets canceled will get more attention, right?
I mean, evidently.
Because it's trivial, right? It's trivial. It's easy to get mad about. You don't have to think deeply about it. But with the student can't access their courses, it's a deep issue. It's a serious issue. People don't really want to think about it, right? Which is why it's hard to get that attention in the first place. But if you get enough people, you will turn the tides to your favor, which is what happened with the CVS case when they refused to deliver medications to disabled people stuck at home. And what I hope will happen with the Payan versus LACCD case, where a group of blind students sued their school district, and now the school district is saying, no fair, you shouldn't have been able to sue in the first place because the discrimination was not intended, right? And I believe their case goes up to the Supreme Court on March 22nd. So there's a petition if you want to sign it, but that is a current issue, and it's going to need a lot of attention if it wants to succeed. And that's kind of the pitfall, is that sort of power, unionizing and banding together, that takes work to make it work, and that power is not inherent with students. And that's why there's such an imbalance of power between students and their universities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I kind of want to move on to like going back to the original topic.
Oh yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah,
I had
personal
so much more.
experience. Yeah, a personal experience because you're about to end in like 15 minutes. So I want to get this. So what are some of the good experiences with professors? And I can go first.
Oh,
It's like I don't actually like use it much, but I still have it. But like this semester, I'm taking this field class. Essentially, we'll just be driving like in a neighborhood. So as a field trip, we'll just drive like down like a neighborhood, and essentially, like the professor will drive us in the 12-person van for us to kind of do like research on like the urban environment, things like that. But the 12-person van isn't handicap accessible. So like we're trying to find a way for me to be interactive, be there too with the same information, but be able to drive through it. And like my professor is really supportive. Like he's helping me through this entire process. I emailed like the SSWD. I'm still waiting for like their accommodation, what they kind of recommend doing. But I'm glad that my professor really supports me because he wants me to be there. He wants me to be active in that class.
Yeah. Can I ask for one more short tangent?
Yes.
How do we feel
do it.
about the sort of linguistics of handicapped? Is that I'm not tuned into this kind of thing typically because it doesn't really matter, but like, has that become a sort of anachronistic term now, or is that still something that is commonly used and accepted?
I kind of don't care either way personally, but from how I have experienced the term, I feel it's more appropriate when talking about the physical structures to allow access, like handicap parking spots, and the handicap entrance and stuff like that, but not handicap people. That just feels wrong to me for some reason. Maybe I'm just not used to hearing it like that. I don't know if it would be considered insulting by some disabled people, but like the handicapped, that sounds a bit weird, but handicap parking spot, that's like, yeah, it's a handicapped parking spot.
Yeah, it's something that we shouldn't like describe for like people, but describe stuff like parking spots. It's handicap. Yeah, like personally for me, like I don't really like care either way. Honestly, you can call me handicap if you want, but like I don't really care.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't mean to distract from stuff. That's an honest to God danger that we face when like discussing the linguistics. That if we develop like progressive language outwardly and affirmatively, and then it gets like co-opted from underneath us to use to disguise larger issues by like writing think pieces about what words we're trying to use. But okay, yeah. I'll say something from personal experience. I have yet to have like an issue with a professor like not letting me sit in the front of the class or something like that. That's not been a problem, and maybe it's just my major because philosophy is naturally very auditory in its articulations. And if you have something to read, you typically have it like right in front of your face. So for me, it's not too much of an issue. But something like I could easily imagine somebody with like. I mean, I don't have to imagine, I've been directly told somebody with mobility issues will typically have like some trouble on the Sac State campus. And I do want to illustrate just briefly that that's not like a given. That's not the case for every campus carte blanche. It's the case for Sacramento State across, as we say, too much of the board. But I transferred here from a community college down in San Diego, which was somewhat recently constructed out of like an Air Force base. It was San Diego Miramar College. If you've shout out to the Jets. For some reason, they chose a jet as the mascot. I get it. I get it. It's a former Air Force base, but you chose a plane as your mascot. You can't even give it a funny name. But those facilities, as from what I remember, and I obviously am not, don't have any mobility impairments and didn't at the time, but those facilities were, broadly speaking, very accessible. Like if there was a two-story building, even it had a fully, accessible elevator and everything. I don't even remember those elevators like going down, not going down, being out of order within the couple a few years that I went there. So that was, I'll characterize that as a good experience because it was very much a non-experience. Like there was no real friction between the sort of the aspects of it meant to bring accessibility and the aspects of it that like weren't directly affirmatively that, because all of it was reasonably well designed to be accessible.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Yeah, all of my best experiences have been with professors who didn't make a big deal out of it and just kind of seamlessly worked my accommodations into their course. And if there was a problem, they immediately brought it up with me and were like, hey, so there's this thing, and I don't know if you're going to be okay managing it. And if not, how can I support you? Basically, just the very best experiences have been the ones where there was barely an experience at all because I didn't have to worry about it and I could just go about my classes normally just like anyone else. Shout out to all of my professors, well, almost all of them, for being really good about my accommodations and flexible and not being afraid to ask questions and how to best accommodate me if they didn't quite understand. That is like 10 out of 10 exactly what I am looking for in that sort of interaction. The bad experiences though have usually been when they frequently forgot my accommodations and kept setting things up so that I had to remind them like every time I went into class, hey, I need this accommodation. And they still do it because they're not that petty, but it's stressful and a little embarrassing to have to remind them of my needs every time I walk into class. And every time they put up a video and they keep forgetting to turn captions on, especially if it's in person, I have to like raise my hand and be like, professor, I need the captions. And that's embarrassing, right? That puts you on the spot and you're like the only one who needs them because if there's anyone else in the classroom, they sure didn't speak up or say anything. And it's so hard to like pull the professor aside and be like, hey, could you turn on the captions? Because usually they're like standing on the other side of the room. And, if you try to signal at them, you have to do it a little more visibly than you'd like because they're not paying attention to you. They're paying attention to the screen or the other side of the classroom. Which is why I really liked online learning accessibility wise, because I could request the live transcript anonymously, or I can direct message the professor like privately, like true privately, hey, could you turn on the captions, right? But yeah, those have been kind of the extent of my bad experiences, but that is not representative of any and all bad experiences that might occur with students at Sac State. I know several students whose professors have repeatedly disregarded their accommodations and insisted that they do things the professor's way instead of the way they require with their accommodations, which is unacceptable and extremely rude. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really, so I'm really glad that we like most of our experiences are good. Like I never personally had like a bad experience with professors. Like what you said, Rian. A lot of professors just reach out to me and be like, hey, we have this field trip in mind. I'm not sure if it's accessible. Do you think it's accessible? And then I kind of look it up, like kind of see what I can do. But like for like some field trips, like I remember we were doing like some kind of like experiment with soil and stuff. like I was asking, like, am I gonna do it by myself because I can't physically do it? And she just basically says that everything is group related, so you won't have to like do everything by yourself. You can do like other stuff with it, but you don't have to force yourself to try to do that physical thing. And I think that's most of our experiences. But I do understand there is bad experiences too.
Yeah, and that's
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's why we're here. I'll just mention like briefly that
Mm-hmm.
I think a part of the reason, like professors who are really good about accommodating disability, are basically good for I think two reasons that I'm noticing, and these are probably not comprehensive, but here we go. The first is that they're just like decent people. You know, you're a professor to teach and not to get through it, not just to make money. Obviously, it is a job, but it's more than a job typically. Um, and professors like they from my experience, and I think just in general, they want their students to learn as best they can, and they'll go out of their way to make sure that happens if they have to, for the most part. um, and that's not, you know, every professor, and I don't think every professor should be expected to go out of the way, because it's already a difficult job even when you have don't even when you don't have to make any reasonable accommodations. But anyway, I just characterize them as like pretty good people for the most part, by virtue of the like the selective pressures that get them into this job in the first place, you know. Um, but also, it's been a lot of the times when professors are good at accommodating for disability is because they just don't have to. Like they already teach in such a way that is broadly accessible. And I we're getting better about that, like as a society, about like teaching things in multiple modalities. An old understanding of that has to do with learning styles, which turn out not to be real, but like modalities and the multiplicity thereof are very helpful when teaching a thing. You learn it better when you learn it more than one way. And as professors get better at catering to multiple modalities, they get better at, you know, that just naturally lends itself well to effectively universal design. Not perfectly, but well. And that's certainly an improvement from, you know, the relatively inaccessible like lectures of decades past. So as professors like get better at that kind of thing, it wouldn't be too difficult to like integrate into that training, that multiple modality training, uh, things like, you know, universal captions, you know, just like set them on by default every time, um, without having to, because that is trivially easy, and it provides multiple modalities for those who benefit from multiple modalities, and almost everyone does, and it provides multiple modalities for those who can only benefit from one of those modalities, you know. So yeah, what I mean to suggest is that like universal design is not, or attempts at universal design are not necessarily like an inflicted condition upon professors or administrations. They're the principles therein are integratable with like just better systems in general. Actually, I guess I should say not just but yeah, not just in insofar as like being universally accessible would be a better system, all else being equal, but like it's not all else being equal. The universally accessible system is better for everyone. That's there we go.
Yeah, so I guess we're about to reach time. So before we kind of end this podcast episode, does Ryan or William have any last words?
We're good at podcasting.
William, I'm gonna have to ask you later about your claim that learning styles aren't a thing, but I fully agree with what you said about universal design. And yeah, I mean, SSWD is a really great department, and I appreciate its existence. And the beauty the beauty of it lies in the fact that you don't have to use your accommodations all the time or all of them at all. You can just use it as a safety net for when you need it, and I think that's a really useful way to go about it when you're limited in what you can do to make your surroundings accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So do you have anything else to say, William?
The other buzzword is where's the ramp?
That's good. Okay, so this
Use
is the
it.
end of our.
Make it a thing.
So this is the end of our podcast episode. We discussed the SSWD process, our good and bad experiences, and what else did we discuss?
Politics. I don't know.
Yeah, that's just politics. Yeah.
Do collective action. It works. Get on board.
Yeah.
Unionize.
Yeah. If your professor doesn't follow you, then let other people know. So thank you so much for listening. Please check out our socials and blog series on kssu.com and our podcast. We release new episodes every Monday at 12 p.m. on kssu.com. So just click listen live at the top. Our second club meeting will be on Friday, February 18th with Dr. Luvis, where he will talk about the benefits of recreational therapy and his time at Sanders Hospital. He essentially took disabled patients out to outdoor excursions, so he will talk about that experience too. And if you don't know, our schedule is fully up on our social media, so make sure to check out. And if you missed anything or like the previous episode or previous club meetings, check us out on YouTube where we post our recordings there at Dana at Sac State. Again, thank you so much. Bye everyone. Where's the ramp?
Where is You're listening to Through Our Lens with the Disabled and Nondisabled Alliance at Sacramento State, a club, organization, whatever, for disabled students, staff, and their allies to discuss and educate each other about disability-related topics, advocate on behalf of disabled students and the community, and to hang out together and just be a community.
So we want to be more recognizable to Sac State. So please join the conversation by following and messaging us on Instagram at Dana at Sac State. It's DANA at Sac State.